Learning. So I am Kristen Scott. I'm here to talk about building high-performing teams, a change management approach to health literacy, or to literacy. I would say health literacy because I have a background in healthcare, so I always add the health part to it. So this is me. I am the founder and principal change strategist at Project Solve, which is my own business. I've been in business for about 3 years or so. So founder and CEO, been doing this for about 3 years. The goal of my work is to make sure that the people are heard and we support the people that are going through these projects. Because a lot of times projects happen to people and, the worker bees don't really have a say in what's going on. And so I just want to make sure that I share that message, and it's an advocate. I like to advocate for others. My earliest experience with doing anything with literacy, in 2012, I was a Reach Out and Read intern working at Nemours, and so I was in the healthcare practices assessing literacy levels for those who are going into kindergarten, and that's where I first got exposed to anything literacy. And then that made me want to take a literacy class when I was doing my master's, again, focused on health. I used to want to be a doctor. So focused on health literacy. And that is when I realized, wow, I'm different than others. And how can I support others in a different way? So now I'm back into it a little bit, and we're going to talk about it from a project management perspective. So I gave you letters A through D, and we're going to do a quick pop quiz. What is the most crucial element for a high-performing literacy team? And you can just hold up which letter you're thinking. A, abundant resources, B, shared vision and goals, C, strict adherence to curriculum, or D, individual teacher autonomy. Let's see, B. We cannot change our answers. We cheating. C and D. That's okay. I should have put all of the above or multiple.
I got B, C, D.
I agree. I think all of these are actually relevant. Having the right resources, right? Maybe not an abundance of resources, but the right resources. And resources can be funding, can be human.
I must have read the question wrong.
That's okay.
You only had to pick the most.
See, y'all got people calling you out.
We were supposed to, but I just.
We gotta.
Those kids who probably got it all wrong, because I gave a circle to them on the test.
So you just kind of put a half circle around them.
Yeah, but there was no most there, so. There was. You're right.
So
Literacy teacher, you have to point that out.
I'm
Oh, that's cool.
But I'm right too, she said.
That is still a good option. Hi, welcome. Oh, don't trip over the door stopper. But I guess we'll say B shared vision is a good one, because you need to you have C. I saw that. B is shared vision, because if you all know the path that you're going down, you all can kind of come around side. All right. So, which is a common source of resistance to change in any type of initiative? A, enthusiasm for new ideas, fear of increased workload, strong administrative support, or clear communication of benefits. What is a common source of resistance if any of these things are not happening or are happening? I'm seeing B. Yeah, fear of increased workload. And that also comes from not understanding what's happening, right, and how it impacts you and what your role is supposed to be. Effective communication in a team should be infrequent and formal, open, transparent, and regular, primarily focused on reporting student data, or limited to administrative announcements. Communication should be open, transparent, and regular, so you're always knowing what's going on and what's happening at that time. Which of the following best describes distributed leadership? One person making all the decisions, shared responsibility, leaders giving orders without input from others, or leaders only focusing on their own classroom? B. I did not realize all of these are B. I just noticed that. Hold me to that. Let me. And then, so what is the most important first step in creating a shared vision for a literacy team? Implementing to new technology, analyzing student test scores, facilitating a discussion about shared goals, or creating a new schedule?
Not me, sorry.
We got C. I'm seeing a majority on C. So facilitating a discussion about shared goals. We're going to talk about communication, because communication is one of the things that I think can be lacking when we're trying to implement something new. And I believe this is the last one. When trying to overcome resistance, the most effective strategy would be to ignore complaints, listen to concerns and provide support, impose a program without a discussion, or threaten negative consequences.
I'll shake things up.
Shake it up. Threaten negative consequences. All right. B, exactly. Listen to concerns and provide support. All right, so quick review of the data. I'm sure you've heard some of this today, so I'll go through it pretty quickly. So nationally, we know both, the benchmarks for this are against fourth graders and eighth graders. And you know that they are all, below basic right now in the level of literacy. Average reading scores dropped 2 points from 2022 and 5 points from 2019. Delaware Kids Can came and did a presentation for me, a group of us, and I actually saw that the decline was happening started in 2010. It's not just because of COVID. It was starting way before COVID. So why is that? I think we need to explore, but that's not for what we're doing here today. And so, we know the state of what's happening in Delaware, and so we're all on the same foundation. Is we know it's a challenge, we know it's a problem, and right now we don't know what the solutions are. So what's important? Teamwork. When we're going after this and tackling such a big problem, teamwork is important. Making sure that we have teams that have diverse perspectives, making sure that we have shared goals and visions around what needs to happen, and build collaborative environments to implement more problem solving, right? And so I have a reflective question for you. Think about a time when you were a part of a high performing team and what made it successful. And you could just shout out some things. So it's resources. I mean, many industries face resource issues, right? And with you all having such a structured schedule anyway, every day, I'm curious, how can we add that structure in? Or how do we kind of restructure what's been built, and so it can address the current populations we're working with, or current students we're working with, and the teachers and the environment, all of the things, right? Okay, so we're gonna talk change. Again, foundation building. Change is to make a shift from one thing to another, and change management is really the people side of implementing change. And so when we're implementing change, I like to use this model because it's very simple. It's like a stoplight. So we realize something needs to change, so we're in this green mode. We're in the planning stages, we're figuring out what we want to implement, right? And so we're in green. I think there's probably a color in between here in this field, and speaking of literacy, but so essentially the goal is to unfreeze because you recognize the change and you did some planning. The second one is, all right, now that we figured out what our plan is, let's implement it. I don't like just planning things. We have to get some stuff done, because you can be in planning meeting over planning meeting over planning meeting, right? When are we actually going to get the stuff done, right? So this is the phase that I don't mind. We can stay in the implementation phase as long as we need to, but it's super important to get there. And then we refreeze. Once we know that something is working, so we don't freeze when we don't think something's working, but we know it's working, and now we kind of want to stay here and we monitor, right? So we can make sure that we're assessing if it continues to be what we need and resources needed. So we talked about this a little bit earlier, but the importance of a shared vision around what are we doing and why are we doing it. It's similar to nonprofits having a mission statement, right? Everyone knows kind of what your North Star is. So it helps us to provide direction. It motivates people and inspires them to go towards this place. It drives change, innovation, and accountability. So if someone is veering to this side and it doesn't align with that shared vision that we've all agreed on, or at least partially agreed on, then we can kind of hold people accountable that you're not doing the things you said you were going to do. And then it facilitates alignment and unity. Now we know how we can pool our resources, who's an expert at what, and all that. So, what does literacy success look like in your school or classroom? What is your vision for it? What'd you say?
Rights being taught again.
Okay. Y'all agree? So we're going to break it down. I want a little bit of a longer sentence here. So here's an example of a vision statement. Again, so if we're aligning around this, if you take this back to your classroom, back to your leadership, what is your vision for literacy or literacy improvement? So here's an example. Every student will become a confident and proficient reader and writer equipped for lifelong learning and success. So what does that look like? Can someone share with me. Yes.
Developing intrinsic motivation
Mm.
and facilitating it.
Oh, I like that.
Right.
Because that's a lifelong, they can take that skill and
Teach them to enjoy writing and reading.
I like that. That feels attainable, right? What about anybody else? And these are just some examples I came up with, and they don't have to be as like wordy or complicated. I think that's a good one. Okay.
I think you have
You like that one? Y'all are a good group. Y'all need to kind of collaborate. I know y'all at different schools.
The keynote speakers.
And that's a good point, because what I said is earlier is diverse perspectives at the table. Who is making these strategies? Who are making these plans? Are they fully accounting for what I learned is an invisible backpack that kids bring to school, that adults also bring to school with them? You don't know what this kid dealt with prior to coming into the classroom or walking in those doors. You don't know what they're dealing with when they're about to go home sometimes, right? You may have an idea, but you don't know, and you're not in it. Or I didn't even add trauma in here. ACEs, trauma, all of that type of stuff, like all of that plays a role in how you implement, how you teach, how you work with and engage with students. And I know that you can't, this one size fits all approach to a lot of strategies just doesn't work, like you were saying. So some pieces that we want to consider is the process. So when you're implementing any new program, and these are also questions that you all can ask about the strategies that are being implemented in your schools, in your environments of, okay, assess how did they find out that this was the right strategy? Where did you get your data from? Who did you talk to? This is my process for implementing any new project. Why are we doing it this way? And how did you know that this was the way we should do it? And then help to evaluate that plan. Let's plan how we're going to implement this, because just because Kuumba account, oh, I can't, it's my brain just kind of glitched there, sorry. Just because Kuumba Academy can do it this way in that place doesn't mean Aspira Academy can do it here. But you all receive the same strategy because it's kind of best practice in the state, right? So how can you plan how to implement that in your school? And then implementing is my favorite part, like I already said, is now that we know how to plan to make it work based on the resources we have access to, how can we implement that? And then monitoring. Again, we talked about time being a very, very limited resources, but what are the things that we can monitor to know very quickly if it's working or not? And this doesn't have to be a linear process. You're gonna go back and forth between this as you implement plans. So what can hurt implementing anything? Poor communication, lack of clear vision, making it a mandated change. We talked about buy-in. If it's mandated, I didn't have a choice. So you automatically, put your walls up when you don't have a choice, right? When your voice wasn't heard. Insufficient resources, ignoring any concerns you all might raise, and then building a culture of blame, and then lack of leadership support. Again, if it's happening to you all, and you don't have leadership support or buy-in, then that's a challenge. What can help? Recognition, addressing the challenges with resistance, not just saying this is what we're doing, but asking why it might be a challenge. Providing effective communication, sharing that clear vision, making sure that I call the worker bees, I've always been a worker bee, letting the worker bees actually have input on what's happening, because again, you're the day-to-day operators, you're the one implementing this stuff, so why wouldn't you have a voice in making sure it happens? I know it's not always an easy thing to get everyone around the table, but how can we get more voices involved in solving this challenge? So, you talked about this a little bit earlier, is I always like to think about the personalities that are at the table when we're trying to implement something. You're gonna have people who are super enthusiastic. You're gonna have people who are, we've always done it this way. Why are we trying to change now? Those are my favorite people to change their mind. It takes some time, but you just gotta come alongside. A lot of times those people need more data, need more support, need more something. You've got a visionary. I have a lot of visionaries I'm working with right now who have all these ideas, but don't know how they want to implement it or get it done, right? And so you have to have someone who has that process and operation-oriented brain next to that visionary, partnering with them to say, okay, that was fantastic that you want to do this. Here are A through Z, the steps of how we can get that done. But this one over here, this idea you had, this only takes us 3 steps to do. should we work on implementing this one kind of before we do this one? So having someone who has the courage and strength to really speak to, let's pause on something that isn't really in our wheelhouse right now, because you don't want things to fail just because someone wanted them to happen, right? So navigating resistance. Whenever you're implementing something new, people are going to resist. Change is scary, no matter what you're doing, right? And so it's super important for you to understand why people are resisting something new. So then you can kind of address the specific pieces. You might have that group think. One person says yes, and they're the loudest voice in the room. One person says they don't want to do it, and so everybody else is coming alongside. Go build that person into a change champion. Figure out why they're saying no, ask them their questions, and maybe they need to be at the table so you can have them bring buy-in to the other people that they're kind of bringing along. You want to communicate and provide resources. Again, we mandate change, but we don't give anybody training. We don't give them any resources. We don't tell them or assist them in how we're actually going to get it done. So resource is key. And then we talked about this slightly earlier is providing role clarity. What is my role in this? You want to implement this. What am I supposed to do? What is my piece that I have to take on? And so we know effective communication is super important. We have to be open and transparent with our communication anytime we are implementing something new. And these are just some questions I like to think about when we're implementing a new project or a program or something. What are the main methods of communication in the school? So if you are implementing a new standard, a new best practice, does everybody use email? Is it better to text it out? Is it better to have an in-person meeting? How can we make sure that everyone gets the information versus assuming everyone's gotten the information? Who needs to be informed? You know, are we just telling leadership, but we're not letting that information trickle down? And then what information needs to be shared and how often? Do you hear about it once and never again? What does that look like? So a key piece of the pie is to distribute leadership. We don't have just one person making decisions, right? We have everyone kind of sharing their voice. We identify and develop leaders. Just because this person may not be in leadership for a long amount of time, or maybe their first year or first 6 months or so in the school, doesn't mean that they don't have value to add to what's happening. And then mentorship and peer coaching. You know, how do we make sure people are lifelong learners? We're trying to convince the students to be lifelong learners, but how do we support our teams in becoming lifelong learners to build and put together the puzzle together? So I just want to say also is you cannot do this alone. You have to build a culture of collaboration. How does collaboration look at your different institutions? Talk to me. What does that look like? What does that feel like? And how often are you able to collaborate? You know, so it's great to hear that because there's a culture that we have to build. And even at your school, how would you say your leadership approaches? I know you said you're at a large school, right? But how does your leadership approach kind of the same type of situation? And that's what I do. Like you do outgrow, and it's the same thing I've seen in businesses that I help. You have grown from 5 staff to 30 staff in a matter of 5 years. You're not equipped to sustain it. You have no SOPs, no processes, no job description, nothing in place. And why do you think everything's going to crumble? Or you all are just. I used to be on a team, and I used to tell them I feel like I'm holding up the walls every single day. And then when I left, the walls crumbled, right? And that's a lot of pressure for some of the more passionate people to feel, right? Last question, and then I know we're at time, but do y'all as leaders get a chance to come together to discuss what's working in their schools? So I guess it just depends on the readiness of the leader to change, right? Because you could say you're ready to change or ready to do things, and you're just not. Or you just don't think it's going to work, or they don't realize the resources that they have available. But this was very helpful. I want to meet your CEO too at some point, but this was very helpful. So nice to meet all of you all. Keep doing all the important work that you're doing. Thank you.